I opened my eyes, the room unfamiliar, my breath hitching as I realized the man beside me wasn't Jake. My phone buzzed. A viral photo. Me, in bed, next to a stranger. My heart stopped. The door swung open. Jake stormed in, eyes blazing with anger. "What the hell did you do?" His voice was icy. I wanted to scream, to explain, but I couldn't. Eleanor stood behind him, a triumphant smile playing at the corners of her lips. I had fallen into a trap, a perfect plan to destroy me. I had believed I had a happy marriage. That's what everyone around me said, that Jake and I were the perfect couple, a brilliant lawyer and a successful financier, two people with solid careers, a beautiful love that lasted through our teenage years. But perhaps that perfection only exists in my imagination, a sweet dream before being awakened by harsh reality. I am Amanda, a lawyer specializing in commercial litigation, who spent my youth building a career and believing in love. I am not a weak person, nor am I someone who easily gives in, but I made a mistake. I believed that love could conquer all. When I first met Jake, he was a man of ambition, intelligence, and sincerity. He captivated me with his confidence and ambition. We loved each other without any doubts, without any reservations. I used to think I was a lucky woman to have a man like him by my side. We got married after 3 years of dating, a fairy tale wedding, but I didn't realize that from the moment I stepped into Jake's family, a silent war had begun. His mother, Eleanor, was a woman everyone respected. She was powerful, rich, sophisticated, and also extremely scary. From the first day, I felt the coldness in her eyes when she looked at me. There were no outright insults, no public protests, but I knew that, in Eleanor's mind, I would never be a worthy daughter-in-law. Eleanor never needed to say it. Every gesture, every look, every seemingly harmless word was a hidden stab under her perfect cover. She never openly opposed our marriage, but she never acknowledged me either. Every time we met, she had a way of reminding me that I was an outsider, someone who didn't belong in this world. At first, I thought it was just a matter of time. I believed that if I loved Jake, if I was sincere enough, Eleanor would accept me one day. But I was wrong. She had no intention of giving in. On the contrary, she secretly tried to find ways to separate us. The elaborate lies began to appear. The conversations between Jake and I gradually became heavy. At first, it was small things. A date that was canceled because his mother called urgently, a dinner that was canceled because he had an emergency. Then gradually, Jake became distant. The initial sweetness faded over time. He stopped coming home on time. My texts were forgotten. Dinners were spent waiting in silence. I lied to myself that it was just the pressure of work. Jake was an ambitious man, and I didn't want to be the nagging wife because my husband was busy. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. It wasn't work that changed Jake. It was something else. Things got worse when Eleanor started interfering directly in our marriage. She always had a way of making me feel inadequate. A casual comment about my decorating, a gentle but pointed remark about how I didn't take care of Jake. The dinners I cooked always had something missing in her eyes. Every time we argued, she was always behind the scenes, gently stirring up Jake's doubts about me. I remember one time clearly, coming home from a long day in court, exhausted and hoping to see Jake, but he wasn't there. My text messages went unanswered. Then a few hours later, I got a call from Eleanor. Her voice was soft, but I could hear the satisfaction in her words. "Jake's here with Mom, Amanda. He looks tired. Maybe you should let him rest tonight." I felt a chill run down my spine. I knew it was more than just a suggestion. It was Eleanor's way of declaring that I couldn't have Jake completely, that I was only a wife in name, and Jake was still her son. I began to feel lost in my own marriage. Jake no longer looked at me with the same loving eyes as before. The arguments became more frequent, and every time Eleanor was there to add fuel to the fire. One time I heard her say to Jake when she thought I wasn't there, "A woman like her only cares about her career. A real wife knows how to take care of the family, not chase after fame." I clenched my fists so hard that my nails dug into my skin. I wanted to step out, to confront, to scream about how much I had sacrificed for this marriage. But I didn't. I just stood there, silently feeling the cracks growing in my heart. My love for Jake didn't disappear all at once. It wasn't a storm that destroyed everything in a flash. It was small cracks, gradual changes, little by little, until I realized that there was only distance and doubt between us now. I tried to hold on. I tried to be a better wife, more patient, but patience can't save anything when the other person no longer wants to fight together. And then, that fateful day came. The day Eleanor stopped trying to hide her hatred. The day I was stripped of everything with a perfect plan that I didn't even know about. But I didn't know that it was also the day that marked the beginning of a new person, a different Amda, stronger, sharper, and most importantly, no longer believing in dreams of happiness. I used to believe that I could control everything, that if I was strong enough, persistent enough, I could save my marriage, but I was wrong. The seemingly small cracks between Jake and me became chasms that I could never cross, and while I was still trying to hold on, Eleanor was ready to deliver the final blow, pushing me into the depths of despair. That night, the air was cold, the atmosphere foreboding. Jake said he had to work overtime, something that had become all too common in recent months. I no longer asked, no longer responded, just nodded out of habit. I was also too tired to care about the lies that he thought I didn't realize. Soon after, Eleanor called me. Her voice was soft and caring, as if there had never been any underlying animosity between us. "Amanda, Jake is busy tonight. Would you like to come over for dinner with me?" I hesitated. Part of me felt that something was wrong, but my mind told me that I was probably overthinking it. She was Jake's mother. I was her daughter-in-law after all, and this wasn't the first time I'd had dinner with her. I agreed. And it was the stupidest decision of my life. When I arrived, Eleanor had a sumptuous meal set up, the food beautifully plated, the red wine sparkling in crystal glasses. She was surprisingly friendly, pouring me wine and telling endless stories as if to lull me into a state of relaxation. I was wary of her usual coldness, but it was this pretense of friendliness that made me complacent. I took a sip of wine. At first, everything was normal, but after a few minutes, I started to feel dizzy. My body became heavy, my eyelids felt heavy, as if an invisible force was pulling me down. I could no longer control my thoughts. I saw Eleanor smiling, her eyes as sharp as a knife, cutting through every piece of my consciousness. Then everything went dark. I don't know how long I was unconscious. When I opened my eyes, the first thing I noticed was the unfamiliar scent. This room wasn't my home. This bed wasn't mine. And most importantly, the man lying next to me, a stranger's face, the faint smell of alcohol on him, was definitely not Jake. Panic set in. I tried to sit up, but my head was still heavy, my body weak, as if all the strength had been drained from me. I looked down at my body. My clothes were still intact, but that didn't ease my fear. I didn't know where I was, what had happened. Before I could even gather my wits, my phone buzzed. Text messages, missed calls, social media notifications. I shook as I opened the phone, and then my heart clenched. On Facebook, a post was shared widely, a picture of me sleeping in bed next to this stranger. The ambiguous status hinted at a night of cheating, hundreds of comments and shares. The words were as sharp as knives stabbing deep into my honor. I couldn't believe my eyes. I wanted to scream, to erase everything, but it was too late. Someone had arranged it all, and I knew exactly who was behind it. The door to the room flew open. Jake stormed in, his face red with rage. He threw his phone on the bed, the screen still displaying the horrific photo. Eleanor stood behind him, her eyes filled with fake horror. "Amanda," Jake stammered, his voice choked with rage. "What the hell did you do?" I opened my mouth, but no words came out. How could I explain something I didn't even understand? How could I prove my innocence when the evidence was right in front of him? The man beside me feigned confusion, muttered a few nonsensical words, and hurried out of the room, leaving me to face Jake's hateful gaze. I had hoped that, no matter what, Jake would believe me, but I had overestimated his love for me. He didn't give me a chance. Not a question, not a moment's hesitation, just disappointment, disgust in his eyes as he looked at me. "We're done." His voice was cold as ice. I felt the world fall away from me. Eleanor stood there, one hand on her chest, pretending to be too shocked to speak. But in her eyes, I saw something else. Satisfaction. She had won. She didn't need to scream. She didn't need to expose me in the usual way. Just one photo, one perfect act, and Jake believed it all. I don't remember how I left. I don't remember dragging myself home or collapsing on the floor, heartbroken. I only know that, the moment the door closed behind me, I had lost everything. But what Eleanor didn't know was that she hadn't destroyed me. She had just created an enemy she could never defeat. I never thought my life could be destroyed so quickly. It had all happened so fast, so perfectly, as if it had been planned out down to the last detail. From the moment I opened my eyes in that strange room with that man, to the moment Jake barged in with hatred in his eyes, I knew Eleanor had finally gotten what she wanted. I had no chance to protest, no way to defend myself. In Jake's eyes, I was no longer his wife. I was just a despicable traitor. I saw disappointment in his eyes, but more than that, anger. He didn't scream, didn't ask me what had happened. He didn't need answers, because he had the evidence right in front of him. Eleanor played the role of the grieving mother. She put her hand to her chest, her eyes filled with shock, as if she couldn't believe what was happening. "Oh my God, Amanda, how could you do this to Jake?" Her voice was shaking, but I didn't have to look closely to see the satisfaction behind that mask. I wanted to speak, to explain, to scream that it was all a conspiracy, but the words stuck in my throat. I knew that no matter what I said, Jake wouldn't listen. He was no longer the man I loved, and our love was no longer strong enough for him to stop and ask questions. I stood there, watching the man who had been my world turn his back on me without a moment's hesitation. Not a moment's hesitation, not a single doubt. There was only cold judgment and a foregone conclusion. The very next day, the divorce papers were handed to me. No text, no phone call. Jake didn't want to hear my explanation. He didn't want to see me. All I got was a cold file and a brief message from my lawyer. "Sign this and we're done." I thought I would scream, throw everything away, beg him to give me a chance. But when I looked at the papers in front of me, I only felt a strange emptiness, a pain so deep that I couldn't make a sound. Eleanor had won. She didn't need to threaten me, didn't need to push me out of this marriage by force. With just a perfect plan, she made Jake leave me on his own, and that was 100 times more painful. I picked up the pen. My hand trembled, the words before my eyes blurred, but I didn't cry. Maybe because I knew that even if I screamed that I was innocent, no one would believe me. Eleanor had done too well. I took a deep breath, then put down the pen and signed. Everything ended in a signature. 3 years of marriage, 5 years of love, all buried by a sophisticated plot, and the most painful thing was that Jake had no regrets. He didn't look back. Not once did I turn back. I packed my things one by one without haste. I had thought of this house as my home, but now it was just an empty shell, a place that no longer belonged to me. When I left the house, Eleanor stood in the doorway, smiling triumphantly at me. She said nothing, just tilted her head slightly as if she were sending off a loser. But what she didn't know was that I wasn't a failure. I wouldn't cry, I wouldn't beg, I wouldn't give her the satisfaction she wanted. I walked away, not looking back. I had lost everything. But I wasn't finished, because from that moment on, I was no longer the weak Amanda of yesterday. I left in silence, not a tear, not a word of complaint, but deep inside a storm was brewing. I didn't collapse, because I knew that people like Eleanor never win forever. They could push me down the abyss, but they forgot one thing. I'm not the type of person who can be destroyed easily. I left the city, carrying pain and resentment with me, but I didn't let it turn me into a weak person. I spent the first months burying all my emotions, focusing on one thing only: regenerating myself. I was no longer the Amanda of yesterday. I am no longer the woman who used to fall for love, who used to believe in sweet dreams of a home. I have become a different version of myself, stronger, more ambitious, and most importantly, no longer easily trusting anyone. I changed careers. The law was no longer where I wanted to devote myself. It could not protect me. It could not protect the truth. I realized that if I wanted real power, I needed to enter another battlefield: finance. I threw myself into that world with all my determination. Every day I studied, I worked, I studied every number, every fluctuation in the market. I did not sleep, did not rest, only one goal: to build my own empire. 5 years have passed. The weak Amanda of that day has long since died. Now I am a powerful businesswoman, the head of a financial group with influence in the market. No one looks at me as a pitiful betrayer. I do not need anyone's pity. I do not need anyone's help. I have risen on my own, step by step, patiently and coldly, but my success is not simply to prove myself. It is part of a larger plan, a plan of revenge. I never forgot what Eleanor did. I never forgot the look of contempt she gave me as I left. I have never forgotten the betrayal of Jake, the man who once swore to love me forever but who trusted a photograph more than his own woman. And I knew I did not need to rush. I just needed to wait for the right moment. Over the years I quietly collected all the evidence about Eleanor and Jake. I did not act hastily. I did not leave any traces. I just quietly observed, gathered information from relationships in the industry, from forgotten documents, from seemingly harmless transactions that contained unusual signs. I knew how to find their weaknesses, because I knew them better than they knew themselves. Eleanor was an ambitious but arrogant woman. She believed her power was inviolable, but everyone has a flaw. For her it was greed. I let her destroy herself by her own mistakes. I began to manipulate the market. I invested in rival companies, taking control of key areas that Eleanor's group depended on. I made her believe that she was still in control, while step by step she was walking right into the trap I had set. Then the moment came. A series of financial investigations began. Shady investments were exposed. Contracts that Eleanor had trusted were canceled en masse. Shareholders lost confidence. The market turned against her, and the corporation she had once been proud of began to collapse. Jake was not spared from the spiral. His company, which relied heavily on Eleanor's connections and finances, quickly went downhill. He had believed himself to be a talented man, but the truth was that he was just a pawn in his mother's hands, and when her biggest pawn fell, he had no way out. I didn't have to show up. All I did was sit back and wait, and when Eleanor and Jake finally realized that they had lost everything, I knew my revenge was complete. But the best part wasn't that I beat them. The best part was that I didn't have to do much. I just rose up, stronger than they could ever imagine, and let them fall on their own, and that was the perfect revenge. I didn't have to do it myself. I didn't have to destroy them myself. I just had to bide my time, sow the seeds of greed and arrogance, and let them dig their own graves. And finally that day came. It all started with a buzz in the market. Secret financial investigations, anonymous leaks of illegal deals, shady money moving through multiple channels to hide something nefarious. Eleanor's group was a solid financial empire, but it had grown too long on the foundation of greed, fraud, and shady relationships. Once the light was shed on those dark corners, the whole system would collapse beyond repair. I didn't need to be directly behind the investigations. I just needed to put important information in the hands of people with ulterior motives, people who were waiting for the opportunity to bring Eleanor's empire down. Shareholders lost confidence. Customers withdrew their funds. Partners who once worshipped her now turned their backs, looking for ways to protect themselves. It all happened like a chain reaction that could not be stopped. Once the beast was wounded, predators would not miss the opportunity to tear it apart. Eleanor, who had once stood proudly at the top, was now reeling under a series of accusations. Bank accounts were frozen, real estate was seized, investors fled. She, who had controlled everything with her sharpness and absolute power, now could not even control her own future. I wondered if she realized that this was the price she had paid for what she had done to me. Jake was no better. His company had relied heavily on Eleanor's support. When she collapsed, his entire system went downhill. Unfinished projects were canceled, loans lost their backing, business relationships that had once been close disappeared as if they had never existed. A man like Jake, who had thought himself a brilliant businessman, now realized that he had never truly stood on his own 2 feet. Without Eleanor, he was just a puppet without strings, playing a game that no longer had room for him. I can picture it, Jake sitting in his office, staring at the red numbers on the screen, the phone ringing with calls from banks, partners, lawyers. The numbers that were once his pride were now signs of irreversible failure. Once the market smells blood, there's no going back, and Jake, no matter how hard he tries, can't reverse the inevitable. But the cruelest thing isn't losing money or power. It's realizing you've lost the most precious thing you've ever had. One dark night, in the depths of despair, Eleanor finally confessed to Jake. She had nothing left to lose, nothing left to protect. Her pride had collapsed with her empire. No more elaborate lies, no more carefully calculated plans. Just the raw truth, bitterer than anything else. She told him everything. About that fateful dinner, about the drugged wine, about the strange man in that room, about the photo that had been staged to make Jake believe I had betrayed him. Jake was silent. Maybe he didn't want to believe it, but deep down he knew it was true. He knew that Eleanor had always controlled his life. He knew that she had planned it all. But what hurt him the most wasn't the lie. It was that he believed it. He had abandoned me. He had pushed me out of his life without a doubt. You didn't give me a chance to explain, to defend myself. And now, when it all fell apart, when your whole world collapsed, you realized that you had lost the only thing that mattered most. But it was too late. I was no longer there. I was no longer his woman, no longer the one who waited for him, no longer the one who believed in that blind love. I had long since stepped out of his shadow, created my own empire, become someone he could never touch again. Jake might regret it, might hate himself, but that didn't matter to me anymore, because now I was the one in charge, and they, Jake and Eleanor, were just the ones who fell in the very game they thought they had mastered. I had thought about this day. I had imagined Eleanor and Jake standing before me, subdued, humiliated, begging for a chance to make up for their mistakes. But when it actually happened, I didn't feel the satisfaction I thought I would. I felt nothing but emptiness. I sat in my office, which was now the center of a powerful financial group. I am no longer the woman who was rejected 5 years ago, no longer the weak person who was pushed out into the street with an unjust sentence. I have rebuilt everything, have stood firmly on my own 2 feet, have become the strongest version of myself. And then the door opened, carrying in 2 people I thought I never wanted to see again. Jake and Eleanor walked in. They looked haggard and exhausted. Gone were the fine clothes. Gone was the proud facade of a family that had once stood at the pinnacle of power. Instead, they were just 2 failed people, people who had lost everything, people who were left with nothing and a sinful past. Jake looked at me, his eyes no longer filled with pride. They were filled with regret, with despair. He knelt down right in front of me. I wasn't surprised. I just watched silently. The man who had abandoned me, who had believed a lie more than his own wife, was now kneeling before me, begging for something he knew was impossible. Eleanor, the woman who had manipulated my entire life, was now bowing her head. I could see the tears streaming down her face, could hear the trembling in her voice as she apologized, but the words were worthless. They came too late, too meaningless. I didn't respond right away. I just stared at them. I saw Jake shaking, saw Eleanor wringing her hands, saw them clinging to a fragile hope. They must have believed that I still had something in me, that I might forgive, might be generous enough to come back. But they didn't understand. I wasn't the Amanda I used to be. I stood up slowly but surely. I looked at them, not with anger, not with hatred, just the calm of someone who had survived. You brought this on yourself. My voice was soft, but each word was like a knife cutting through space. I don't need revenge. Life did it for me. Jake collapsed. Eleanor bowed her head, but I didn't care anymore. I had come too far to go back, had built a life that no longer had a place for them. I turned and left the room, leaving them in the despair they had created for themselves. And this time, I didn't look back. I left the room, leaving Jake and Eleanor collapsed in despair. There was no pity, no regret. There was only the absolute serenity of a victor. But my victory was not in seeing them beg for forgiveness. It was not in seeing them lose everything. It was in the fact that I no longer cared. The sky outside was strangely clear, as if the universe were silently acknowledging that justice had been served. I walked out of the building that now bore my name, an empire I had built from scratch, no longer the weak Amanda I had once been, no longer the woman who had fallen in a sham marriage. I had risen, stronger than ever. 5 years ago I had left them with nothing. They had taken my honor, taken what I held most dear, and pushed me into the abyss. But I did not wallow in resentment. I did not let myself be consumed by pain. I had risen, not for revenge, but to prove that I could. I did not need to push Eleanor and Jake down. They did it themselves. They destroyed themselves with greed, with arrogance, with mistakes they believed no one could see through. I simply kept walking, while they were bogged down in the very games they thought they had mastered. Now Jake had nothing left. His company had collapsed completely. The relationships that had once surrounded him for profit had disappeared without a trace. Jake had not only lost his money, he had lost his self-respect, his honor, his pride that had made him look at me with contempt, and most importantly, he had lost me, the only person who had ever truly loved him. But that was no longer my concern. And Eleanor? The woman who had thought herself invincible was now a miserable failure. She had thought she could manipulate everything, that she could bend the fate of others to her will. But she forgot that people like her can win for a while, but cannot win forever. The best revenge is not to make the opponent suffer immediately, but to let them realize that they have destroyed themselves, to give them time to witness themselves losing everything, to let them understand that the person they once looked down on, who once trampled underfoot, has now surpassed them to the point of being unreachable. I don't look back at them. I don't care what they will do next. I have ended my journey here. This story no longer belongs to them. It belongs to me. I continue walking, not because I need to run away from the past, but because the past no longer matters. I no longer live to prove anything to anyone. I live for myself, for the life that I have created with my own hands, for the future that I know no one can take away. I have won, not because I destroyed them, but because I have risen, stronger, more resilient. And when I stand at the top, I don't need to look down to see those who once harmed me fading away, because now I only care about the road ahead, a path that I know no one can stop me from continuing. Life is not always fair. There will be times when you are betrayed, hurt, and put in situations that you never thought you would have to face. But what matters is not how many times you get knocked down, but how you get up after those falls. My story is not simply a revenge, but a lesson in resilience, intelligence, and how one can turn suffering into strength. When she lost everything, she did not collapse, did not turn back to beg those who betrayed her. She quietly left, rebuilt herself, became a stronger, more powerful person, and finally let those who hurt her pay the price with their own collapse. So what is the lesson for all of us? 1. Don't let suffering define you. When betrayed, hurt, the easiest thing is to resent and live in hatred, but that is not the way for you to win. The best revenge is not to make the other person suffer immediately, but to let them witness you succeed without needing them in your life anymore. Use the pain as motivation to rise up, to prove that you don't need pity or a second chance from anyone. 2. Believe in yourself. Don't rely on anyone else. Amanda once loved Jake with all her heart, but in the end, that man didn't believe her. That's the important lesson. Don't put your whole life in someone else's hands. Always have a plan for yourself. Always have your own path that you can follow without anyone guiding you. When you are strong enough, you don't need anyone's validation to know your own worth. 3. Patience is the key to perfect revenge. When you are wronged, don't rush to retaliate. Evil people often dig their own graves. What you need to do is quietly observe, build yourself up, and let them fall into the trap they created. Like Amanda, she doesn't need to do much, just be successful, and the world will automatically make the wrongdoers pay. 4. Everyone deserves your kindness. Not everyone will believe you when you need them most. Not everyone will treat you fairly. And that's okay. You don't have to try to please everyone. Be selective about who you surround yourself with, who truly believe in you, and who won't turn their backs on you when the storm hits. 5. When you rise, you don't need revenge. Life will do it for you. Your success is the clearest answer to those who have looked down on you. No need to hate. No need to waste time proving anything to them. Just keep moving forward, keep rising, and let them realize that they have lost someone they can never have again. How do you feel about this story? What have you learned from it? Leave a comment below. If you find this story meaningful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to not miss the next inspirational stories. Let's become the strongest version of ourselves together.